Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today we're tackling a pretty interesting question. Can a video game really be a spiritual successor to a philosophical novel? We're going to be looking at the world of Bioshock and its connection to Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged.
Oh.
And to help us out on this journey, we've got the Wikipedia entries for Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand, and Bioshock.
Sounds like a fun one.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this one. So, for listeners who might need a little bit of a refresher, what is Atlas Shrugged all about?
Sure. So Atlas Shrugged basically paints this picture of a world where all the best and brightest minds, right, the big thinkers, the movers and shakers, they basically decide they've had enough of a society that just wants to leech off them and control them and exploit their talents. So they decide to just, say an R and go on strike.
Right.
And they basically withdraw all their genius and watch as the world kind of crumbles without them.
Yeah, it's a very dramatic kind of premise for a novel. And, through all that drama, Rand is exploring some pretty core ideas of her philosophy of objectivism.
Right.
This idea of reasoned individual achievement. The idea that pursuing your own happiness is the most important moral goal you could have.
Yeah, and it's a philosophy that really pushes back against some of the more traditional ideas about altruism and collectivism.
Yeah.
Rand's argument is that real progress comes from the ambition and the drive of these exceptional individuals.
And, you can't really talk about Rand without talking about her background, right? She escaped from Soviet Russia and saw firsthand what these oppressive collectivist ideologies could do.
Oh, absolutely.
So it makes sense why her work is so gun-ho about individualism.
Yeah, her life totally shaped her worldview, and it's woven into the very DNA of Atlas Shrugged. The novel is this really powerful critique of collectivism and this passionate defense of individual freedom.
Okay, so now let's fast forward a few decades.
Right.
And we find ourselves in this underwater city of Rapture.
Okay.
Which is the main setting of Bioshock.
Right.
Now, the city was built by a visionary character named Andrew Ryan.
Andrew Ryan.
And I don't know if you noticed this, but that name sounds a whole lot like Ayn Rand.
Huh. I never thought about that.
You think that's just a coincidence?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
The developers were definitely hinting at something there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's break this down a little bit. We've got Atlas Shrugged with this kind of idealized society.
Yeah.
And then Bioshock with Rapture, both founded by these individuals who really believe in this idea of human potential when it's not being held back by government interference.
Exactly. It's they both envision these utopias, perfect societies specifically designed for these brilliant minds to just kind of flourish and do their thing without, being held back by all the kind of, normal rules and obligations and stuff.
Right. And initially, Rapture really does flourish.
It does.
They discover this substance called AOM, which is this genetic material that can give people superpowers.
Wow.
And that leads to these crazy scientific breakthroughs. It's almost like Rand's vision come to life.
Right.
This society driven by these exceptional individuals pushing the boundaries of what humans can do.
Yeah, it's a perfect example of, a society fueled by the power of the individual. But here's the thing. Bioshock doesn't just stop there. It kind of starts to peel back the layers of this utopian ideal and expose some of the potential problems with it.
Okay.
You see, this substance, ADOM, becomes the symbol of unchecked ambition, which is kind of, at the core of objectivism, right? But when that pursuit of individual enhancement is taken too far, it leads to some pretty dark stuff. The exploitation of these little girls called the Little Sisters and the creation of these monstrous protectors called Big Daddies.
Right.
It's almost like the game is asking what happens when you take objectivist ideals to their extreme conclusion. Things might look perfect on the surface, but there's often this dark underbelly lurking beneath.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's really making you think, is this what happens when a society is just built on pure ambition?
Yeah, and it's not just the scientific stuff that brings Rapture down. It's the whole philosophy behind the city.
Right.
Andrew Ryan, this belief in pure laissez-faire, no rules, no safety net, no nothing.
Yeah.
It creates this breeding ground for chaos.
It does. Without any kind of structure or rules in place, it's you're just giving people like Frank Fontaine free rein to exploit everyone and everything.
Yeah.
He takes advantage of the weak, manipulates the market, basically just amasses power through any means necessary.
It's almost like the opposite of going Galt in Atlas Shrugged.
How so?
Well, instead of the brilliant minds leaving society, you have these opportunistic people like Fontaine thriving in this vacuum where there's no oversight or ethical considerations.
Oh, that's a really interesting point. It really highlights this tension that's at the heart of both stories.
Yeah.
Like, on the one hand, Rand is all about the individual, but she also really stresses the importance of rationality and ethical behavior.
Yeah.
Fontaine, though he's ambitious and smart, but he's operating way outside those boundaries.
Right.
He's like the embodiment of what can go wrong when people's desires aren't kept in check by some kind of moral compass.
So would you say that Bioshock is like critiquing objectivism?
Well, it definitely seems to be showing the dangers of taking those ideas too far.
Yeah.
It's like a warning sign, right? You build a society solely on individual ambition, and you end up with exploitation, no sense of community.
It really makes you think, what happens when we put individual freedom above everything else?
Yeah, are there any safeguards to prevent the very things that created this utopia from destroying it?
Exactly. And then Bioshock takes it a step further by actually making you confront these ideas through the gameplay.
What do you mean?
You're constantly having to make these moral choices.
Okay.
Do you exploit the little sisters to get more power, or do you try to help them even if it means you're weaker?
It's like the game is forcing you to think about the ethical implications of objectivism in this really personal way.
Yeah, you're not just reading about it, you're experiencing it.
Right, and your choices have a direct impact on the world around you.
It's really interesting how Bioshock uses the fact that it's a game to add this whole other dimension to the philosophical stuff.
I agree, it's not just telling you about the fall of Rapture, you're right there in it.
Yeah, and you have to make these tough choices.
Exactly, and that's what makes Bioshock so compelling. It's not just like a lecture on philosophy, it's an interactive experience.
So we've talked about the similarities between the stories and how Bioshock might be critiquing some of those objectivist ideas.
Yeah.
But what about the characters themselves? Do they also reflect this tension between ambition and responsibility?
Definitely the characters are like these windows into how these philosophies play out in individual lives.
Yeah, let's start with Andrew Ryan, the guy who built Rapture.
Okay.
I mean, he's like the poster child for believing in the power of the individual. He's all about freedom from the government, from traditional morality.
Yeah, he really does embody that spirit of John Galt from Alice Shrugged, the guy who leads the strike of all the brilliant minds.
Right, and one of Ryan's most famous lines is, is a man not entitled to the sweat of his brow?
Oh, yeah.
Which just perfectly sums up that whole philosophy of rejecting collectivism and defending individual rights.
Yeah, but Galt Ryan's vision is kind of idealistic. He builds Rapture to be this perfect utopia, but he doesn't really account for the fact that humans aren't perfect,
Right, it's like saying power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Exactly. Even in a society that's supposed to be all about celebrating individual achievement, you can't escape the fact that some people are going to let that ambition turn into greed and lust for power.
And that's where Frank Fontaine comes in, right?
Oh, yeah, he's the perfect example of that darker side of individualism.
He's a total manipulator.
He is.
Taking advantage of all the loopholes in Rapture's system to get ahead.
Exactly, and his rise to power is like this stark reminder of what can happen when you have a system with no moral boundaries.
Because even though Rand is all about individual freedom, she also talks about the importance of ethical behavior.
Right.
But Fontaine doesn't care about any of that. He's just looking out for number one.
He's proof that unchecked ambition can lead to some pretty terrible outcomes.
It's like Bioshock is asking this question.
Yeah.
What happens when the pursuit of individual happiness completely ignores any sense of responsibility to the community?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And it's not just the big characters like Ryan and Fontaine who give us these insights.
Oh yeah, who else are you thinking of?
Well, there's Dr. Bridget Tenenbaum, the scientist who helped create the Little Sisters.
Yeah.
She kind of represents this move away from those strict objectivist principles towards something a little more compassionate.
Interesting, how so?
Well, she starts out totally driven by her scientific curiosity.
Yeah.
But as the game goes on, she's overwhelmed by guilt over what she's done.
She starts to see the ethical implications of her work.
Exactly. And that suggests that even in a system like Rapture's, where individual achievement is everything, there's still room for people to grow morally.
To recognize that they're part of something bigger than themselves.
Right. And then you have the Little Sisters themselves.
Oh, man.
These poor girls, genetically altered and exploited for their ability to produce Adam.
heartbreaking.
They really represent the ultimate victims of Rapture's out-of-control ambition.
Yeah, their presence in the game really forces you to think about the human cost of a society that puts individual achievement above everything else.
Like, even in a supposed utopia, there are always going to be people who are marginalized or taken advantage of.
Yeah, it's a reminder that we can't just ignore the needs of the vulnerable in the pursuit of some grand ideal.
So through all these characters, Bioshock goes way beyond just summarizing Rand's philosophy.
It really does. It uses these individual stories to explore the different facets of objectivism.
It's been really interesting looking at the connections between Bioshock and Atlas Shrugged.
Yeah, it's amazing how a video game can engage with these complex philosophical ideas.
And what we've seen is that Bioshock isn't just a game, it's a conversation starter.
It makes you question your assumptions about the world.
So as we wrap up here, I want to encourage everyone to keep thinking about the questions that both Bioshock and Atlas Shrugged raise.
Like, how do we balance individual ambition with our responsibility to society?
And what are the ethical limits we should put on our pursuit of progress?
These are questions that are more relevant than ever.
So until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and keep diving deep.